So thanks for coming over here on a full moon. And you probably saw, of course, last night that full moon. Here it is the 16th, but we had that full moon and I pulled in and then we went back over here by the water, looked up into the sky. Jack pointed that out and said, "Well, look at that moon. Lovely." And of course, today is the exact day of the full moon. It's in, since it's the very tail end, the sun is in its path around the sky, the very tail end of Capricorn. So the opposite is the moon in Cancer at this point. And everybody has probably heard about full moons. And there's some lore and there's some worries and there's some ideas and notions about it. But typically, and just to make it kind of nice and simple, full moons is when you do something kind of unusual or different. Ta-da! And what I also have found with full moons, and you can put this into your calendar, is that whatever your typical routine happens to be, it'll reverse during a full moon. Now, it's not going to be every full moon, but most of them. And for instance, if someone is a real neatnik and everything has to be orderly, well, they might be a slob for a couple of days, Or if someone is very prompt, they might just forget a couple of appointments during a full moon. And so this happens to be an example right here, of we're doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you can, as I say, just go and put that into your calendar. So I wanted to start off with a true story. In my 20s, when I was just learning about astrology, I was at a party, kind of similar to this, maybe twice as much people, and we were in our 20s and 30s, and so there was a loud music going on. And I was with a friend who was also studying astrology, and so we were just sitting over there and saying, I wonder, who that person is, what is that sun sign over there, and while we were talking and sharing some notes about astrology, in through the front door walks in this fabulous woman, and she's really dressed really well, and we both stopped what we were saying, looked at her, and then I just watched her come in, nicely dressed and so forth. She really got our attention. Then she tuned in on someone and walked right over towards that person. And we go, who is she? And so then we talk a little bit more, and then we had a couple of guesses, and he says, she's a Leo. I mean, look at the stylishness there. I mean, how she entered so nice, and we've got a sense of style really is so present, And I said, yeah, okay, I can see that. But did you also notice that when she came in the door, again, full of that fiery energy, then she headed straight towards someone that she knew? I think she's a Sagittarius. And so he says, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll go and find out. And so I think he might have wanted to do some flirting. But about 10, 15 minutes later, he comes back to me and says, she's from New York. True story. So we have also happening just a couple of days ago, we've got the classic Mercury retrograde. And we've, periodically you hear about Mercury retrogrades, it's going to mess up your calendar, and if you make some plans, it's just not going to work out. Things will go awry and so forth. And I was born with Mercury retrograde. What does that say about me? But I found that over the years, it's nothing really scary. It happens 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time. It just started a couple of days ago. And so then here, I think on the 3rd of February, it will stop its retrograde course seeming to go backwards, and it'll start to move forwards here again on the 3rd of February. And just during these Mercury retrograde times, it isn't the big bugaboo, it isn't like so scary. However, what happens is whatever plans you made prior to it turning retrograde or backwards, you have to reconfirm during the retrograde period, which is a 3-week period, so that it's going to actually happen, because there will be a change of plans. People will rethink things, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you here right now, just in the last couple of days, maybe this weekend, and the week coming up, you go, this other thing that I was going to do, it's not going to quite work out, which is totally fine, but you have to rearrange things and make some plans. Put it in your book, tell your friends. It's like, plan B or plan C. Okay. And when you do that, and you kind of like go with the flow and figure out like, okay, now I've got the general idea, then it's not going to be a big issue. But it's something that you hear from time to time that, well, watch out, we've got a Mercury retrograde coming up. Not really. Just cross your T's, dot your I's, during that time. Double check on some things. And that brings us also to, like, what are your plans now? We're at this really odd time, this strange time, this COVID time, where we have this international pandemic going on. And of course, I, as well as many other professional astrologers, we were just saying, wow, this is so big, it's happening right now, what's going on in the skies? And so there were lots of discussions back and forth and calculations and so forth. In fact, I recently had my mother pass away, it was just 1 month ago. And so I went back over to Seattle area to, help with the arrangements and so forth. But even though I received many great condolences and so forth, she lived to be 93, died peacefully in her sleep. Hey, can it get any better than that? Yeah. So, and besides, we still keep in contact. Yeah, she was an Aries, and with her sun exactly conjunct the planet Uranus. And Uranus is the technological planet. And so always interested in gadgets and labor-saving devices. And she was born in 1929. So even back in the 60s, we would periodically move. I told several people that, I come from an Air Force family. So we moved every 3 years, So we were in another place, and we had to, again, paint another wall in another place that we went to. But she had to get this gadget that you could pump the paint up the roller, and then you can do it. And it's like, yeah. And of course, you can imagine what happened when TV dinners came around. There's a labor-saving device right there. So we got to know the full course of all of that. And even in the last few years, she had an iPad, technological sorts of things, playing with certain types of artistry games and so forth, and create your own puzzle and things like that. So again, throughout her whole life, that exploratory side of the fire sign Aries was always there, always curious about things, always ready to make friends and to connect with other people. But then the technological side was still always there. In fact, I had to ask her a couple of different times how to do different things. And then when it came to her also wanting to do some writing, it blossomed with her as a poet or as a creative writer when they started having spell check. Because she was a very bad speller. But then when that came around, then it was really great, even though sometimes it wasn't the right word But it sounds like it. That's what spell check does, right? So a couple of other things going on here, connected with what is happening, in the skies at this point. Thank goodness we've got Jupiter that very recently went into the sign of Pisces. And I know that we've got a couple of Pisces here already. And this is also going to be some good news for other water signs. Raise your hand if you are a water sign, or if you know if you're a water sign. And if you don't know what your sign is, or you don't know if you're a water sign, let me see those hands. Okay. So we have the 4 elements in astrology. And it's really interesting in a mathematical, geometrical pattern how things do these triangles, or a square, or an opposition, and those create a certain amount of either tension or having, like, I imagine many times the surf, next to the ocean, and if you can catch that surf, then you're riding the waves of the zeitgeist, or the positive energy of the times. And so the 3 water signs are going to be Pisces, and I mentioned Pisces first because that's where Jupiter is right now. And then the next water sign would be Cancer, and the following water sign would be Scorpio. And before I go into some of the other signs and the elements, let me say the good news for the water signs. Because Jupiter is the greater benefit. In fact, in India, in Jyotish, Jupiter is called Guru. And Guru, or Jupiter, or Zeus, was the greater blessings and good luck, travels, opportunities, really great possibilities. And it's now going to be especially good, this year for water signs. So lucky times, opportunities, and especially notice how Jupiter would work. And that is suddenly from out of the blue, here is an invitation, an opportunity, the phone rings from out of the blue, and then we pay attention to the signs, acting on them, and that's kind of one of the ways, a big way that Jupiter would work. I imagine everybody knows the word synchronicity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, who does not know synchronicity? Okay, very great, excellent. So the coincidences which are not coincidences, and then the opportunities that come up, the signs, the things that just happen. There's been many talks that I've given here and there, and I oftentimes begin by saying, turn your phones on. Which of course is the opposite of what people ask. Because every now and then, and that's going to be true today as I'm sharing some things with you, I might say something that, like rings a bell, or, oh, that makes sense, or, yeah, I can relate that to this other situation or this person in my life. But if there's also a coincidental, synchronous addition to that, like the sounds of birds, I'm hearing in the background here too, or when the phone rings, or anything else that's just, where did that come from? Well, it's all perfect, because then we pay closer attention to that. I'm constantly paying attention to signs, of course, because that's what astrologers do. So one of the things about this Jupiter, thinking about travel, humor, beneficial options and possibilities, and keeping that in mind, and thinking about it as it is called the greater benefit, though that generous feeling of being good unto your neighbor is part of the magic that comes back to you in following Guru, or in following this Jupiter energy. And interestingly enough, and this goes to the sign that Jupiter rules, which is Sagittarius. One of the lucky things, and lucky and Jupiter kind of go together, one of the lucky things just happens to be that the person who is kind of positive, good-humored, ready to smile, has a joke, when it's time for that person to get a promotion, guess what? In compared to the other sourpusses nearby, who's going to get the promotion? Who's going to get the job? Who's going to get the contract? Well, it's the smiling one with the good humor. Okay, but recognize that each and every one of us, we have got Jupiter in our charts. Sometimes, and this is where the signs come in, sometimes we just get more attuned to a particular vibration and it's easier. Or it was part of our background, and our family was traveling family. Guess who? and so it's just, quick and fluid. And I hear a phone. That's my phone. And I was just talking about myself traveling. So, could be a coincidence. When my phone rang, I got a message via Diane. So just recognize that when you are looking at your own individual charts, and my point, of course, is that it's a matter of your own sense of self, how you handle whatever comes up, right? It's your attitude, it's your belief system, and it's how you can handle even crises. So very quickly, for those who don't know, we then have the fire signs, and that was Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. And then we have the earth signs, and that would be Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. And now it's at the end of Capricorn right now, last couple of days. Any Capricorns here? Yep, fine. Okay. Good, welcome. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I know we have some Aquarians coming up here too. Happy birthday to you. And then we have the air signs, which is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. So those are the elements. And as I share some of the different things, just recognize, how the elements, how your signs are being aspected. Well, the big news that started last year is connected with slow-moving Saturn, slow-moving planet Uranus. I mentioned Uranus with my mother, okay, with the technology and so forth. It is presently in a so-called conservative sign called Taurus, and it's usually there for about 7 years. Saturn moving a little bit quicker, but not so fast. It takes 29 years to go around the zodiac. So last year they made a square, and the square kind of pointed towards a certain tension that one can feel, recognizing that this aspect is true around the globe. It's not just the United States. And in the United States, we feel it in a particular manner, that is unique to our country, but they'll do the same thing in France or Germany. So the tension was that the revolutionary, forward-thinking planet Uranus was in the conservative, prudent, practical sign of Taurus. Meanwhile, Saturn, which is more of a taskmaster, we have to make the proper decisions and so forth. So it has more of a conservative slant on its own, has been in Aquarius, which is classically more of a liberal sign. And as I said, last year they had the exact square 3 different times, creating kind of like this tension that perhaps several of us felt, connected with almost like a standoff, because it's almost like, the equal, powerful opponents sizing each other up, and then coming to this place where, okay, something's got to give, and maybe it's a little bit of a tug of war periodically, but then it wasn't or can't be resolved because they were equally strong. And in our country, the United States here, we're feeling also a variation of this, in which we have the left, we have the right, we have the liberals, we have the conservatives, and they both have a strong amount of power to the point where this tension is there. And what is, let's say, part of the lesson for us is connected with some of the noise we're hearing in the background, which is construction, projects, making things happen, coming up with practical solutions to difficult issues. And so as we know about or hear about in Congress, there always seems to be some sort of compromise going on, and I'll give you this if you give me that, and I think a lot of people are so tired of all that, because it's really not keeping to, a high idealism that Jupiter wishes us to attain to, aspire to. So that same square was kind of the background from most of the pandemic, but it was right there. We're going to see it again show up here in September and October, and then you'll see another impasse. You'll see another time when they're going to say, which way is it going to go? Who's going to win? Coming up towards our elections in November. So we've seen it. We're going to see a little bit more of that, and then it's just going to be a matter of so which side you're going to be on. Now comes the big stinker, because I just mentioned that with a Saturn going through the zodiac, it takes 29 years, 30 years. And when you hear about Saturn returns, when we were 29 or when we were 30 or 58, Saturn return. And at those key points, Saturn, which is kind of a maturing planet, has us take a look and reevaluate some things. So think about that, even in your own lives. Late 20s, late 50s, what were you planning, thinking, considering, wanting to do, wanting to make the next jump towards, those things that you would love to say, oh, I have that, or I feel comfortable with that, or I feel more secure because of the decisions I'm making. So all of that is part of it. Now, as I say, we're talking about the big cycle, and that is connected to Pluto. Pluto takes 248 years to go around the zodiac. So we individuals, unless you're a Marvel character, we will probably not experience that personally. But a country can. And the United States, which was born in 1776, has got Pluto in late degree Capricorn. And right now, Pluto is in late degree Capricorn. It's called a Pluto return. And it can only happen with nations, because they're the only thing that can get that old. Or maybe there's a couple of turtles that can do that, But this is a crisis point in the United States. And so even though it's going to be exact this year, in fact, the next couple of months, it will be exact. There's always this thing called an orb, and an orb is around that time. And so from this year, 2022, we go back about 5 years, when Pluto was close enough, it's coming back to where it was when we had our revolution. And during that time, we were fighting a mad King George, and we had choices, and people even within the United States were going to be loyalists, royalists, or they were going to be revolutionaries, they were going to be colonists. And that was the tension at the time, that was the fight. And we're back at that same dynamic just with Pluto. So in the Capricorn element, which is a practical earth sign element, what they did back then was they first of all had to get, free of England. But then it was a matter of, okay, now a constitution, the Declaration of Independence, what do we believe in? What are our ideals? Let's get clear about that, because we have to have this as the foundation if we're going to have a successful republic. And so it's back again at this place where, again, as I said, it's close enough the last 5 years, think about that. Also the next 5 years from now. Sorry. But it's revolutionary in that sense, because Pluto, which, by the way, you've heard of the word a plutocrat, plutocracy, it is the rule by the wealthy. And so what we're having to deal with at this point are those super rich and those very large corporations and those people who align or serve or will work with them. And as we know, Donald Trump would fit into that category as a plutocrat, who was really only pretty much focused on a financial dynamic. But the interesting thing is that this is part of the group and cultural karma. What you plant, you shall reap. That's true with individuals, that's true with also countries. And what was compromised at that point, back at the beginning, was that, okay, how can we have a union and everybody's got to get along, and there's like many different opinions about things, but there's a certain group of people who want to keep slavery. Okay, so they did the big compromise, and slavery was included in a nation built on justice for all. So didn't quite fit. The interesting thing about this, I've mentioned already the revolutionary planet Uranus. It takes 84 years to go around the zodiac. 1776 and 84, 1860. Civil War. When it came back and said, we have to revisit, what we did at the beginning. And what are we going to do now? And of course, it was the Civil War. It was a division, And I don't have to go into all the ramifications of that. But now we're in yet this Plutonian dynamic. And let me say this, just to give you another idea about Pluto. It was discovered in 1930. And 1930 was the Great Depression. But it was also, in this country, it was the Prohibition. And so there was, and I recognize this from the temperance movement, that there was an earnest worry that alcohol was going to destroy society. And so that was their method of dealing with it. And so, of course, then we had the Prohibition, and what happened to that? The underworld, Pluto, god of the underworld, came forth and said, well, we're going to drink anyway.
Make money too.
Then make some money, that's right, but we have to do it illegally. And so suddenly, a bona fide business, a bar, selling drinks, whatever, prior to the Prohibition was suddenly illegal, and they were criminals, after that. Okay, so Pluto is kind of tricky asking us, okay, what is the law, and what is right, what is moral, and what is the right thing to do, okay? And that Pluto now is coming back to visit the United States again during this time, during the last 5 years. We're in the middle of it right now. We're at this fulcrum point right now. Again, and you don't even have to think about, the evil ones, the conspiracies and so forth. You just have to say, what is the right thing to do here? What is true, and recognizing that as a nation, we're still having to deal with the cultural karma that it was okay at the beginning to have slavery. Okay, you could own a person. Okay, and so we had to deal with that again during the Civil War. As we all know, that wasn't the end of it. I mean, that took another 100 years before we got to the 1960s, when we had the civil rights movement and so forth. And so it's like step by step, kind of releasing, freeing everyone, justice for all. Okay, that's what this nation has been doing. And so now we're at this point again, where we're having to pay attention again to the hidden rules, laws, legalities that are not quite just. Okay?
Like the voting rights. They're trying
Like
to
the voting
suppress.
rights, yeah. And now they're trying to make it legal, but is it just? Is it right? Is it fair? Or even like with the Rittenhouse judgment, where all of my friends, we said, well, that was quite obvious. You get a young, 17-year-old, go across the state line with an MK-47. I mean, is he looking for trouble? But he got away with it. And you can look at that and say, that's not right. That's not fair. That's not justice. But remember, this is what Pluto just has in your face, like it was during the Prohibition, to say it may be legal, but is it right? Okay, and then it now comes up to us individually to make our own judgment calls, to say, it's not right, and I have to stand for what is justice, for what I feel is right, whether the law be on my side or not. Now, the interesting thing about this, which goes into this other hat that I have, because you know that I'm a hypnotherapist, and I've been using it for past life regressions for many decades now. But with that, and I've done, by the way, stage hypnosis shows, and it's really quite fun, to get the audience up here and, and now you're going to be doing this. And, no, you're safe. But it was really amazing, that within a short amount of time, just within minutes, a hypnotist can put these seeds, these suggestions into someone's consciousness, and they believe that they are in the Arctic and it's freezing and everybody is shivering, because it's so cold. It was implanted with a hypnotic suggestion. And you can just see that right there. The reason why I mentioned that is that simultaneous to us having a pandemic, which is a viral pandemic, we can also have mental viruses, where an idea, a false idea, perhaps a deadly idea, perhaps an errant idea, can be implanted. Then it is passed on like a virus, and now we've got a conspiracy. And then we're having to ask ourselves again, as a nation, okay, gosh, now what is the truth? Okay, because also back at the beginning, back in the revolutionary times, people were printing pamphlets. That was, their equivalent of our social media today, and they were lying. There was like, this person, over here eats children. It's like all kinds of crazy stuff. So that is not new, but that is part of the Plutonian sense of the underworld pulling out from underneath us, if we're not careful, our sense of foundation, our sense of what we feel is right and wrong. And that's what we really have to watch out for. The positive side of that, though, is that then it helps us to think, okay, what do I believe in? What do I think is right or wrong? What are my ideals here? And that is really what I think God wants. I think that's what Spirit wants us to really look at. To be confronted with injustice, with craziness, with fanaticism, with mental viruses, and finding out the antidote for yourself. I have to be grounded. I have to just say, like, what is right, what is true, what have I known to be true, and then you can make your own personal decisions. You can be a better voter. You can work in your community and interact with other people with your feet on the ground, with a sense of, yeah, this is what I have found over my many decades of life to be true. If I am kind to someone else, if I follow the golden rule, guess what? Comes back, and that is some of the foundations that we have to, as an antidote, as our personal vaccine against the mental viruses, against the conspiracy theories. And if we could, in a similar way to the vaccine, if we can just give that to some certain people that we know, it's like, oh, now you're healed. Oh my goodness, I can think clearly again. Wouldn't that be great?
So with this Pluto and the Saturn, it doesn't sound like this is going to go away soon.
No.
So we
Yeah.
have to live through this again.
We have to kind of bear through this. But at the same time, even in the midst of the Revolutionary War or the Civil War or World War II, there was some terrible things going on. And there were other people who were building up businesses, other people who were making art, creativity. We were just looking at Monet and the Impressionists over here in the other room. And even during World War I, World War II in Europe, there were certain artists who were just making beautiful art. And so again, no matter the madness out there and the craziness, and sometimes it feels like, just like during this full moon, we had that rain that came in yesterday, and people thought, oh, it's going to be really heavy. Well, it didn't turn out to be so bad. But there can be waves, there can be these hurricanes. But it's emotional, political, social hurricanes that come in. We have to batten down, we have to protect the windows, and that is basically us being more proactive. Us with our feet on the ground, what do we need to do to protect ourselves in this hurricane? But it can be a political hurricane. It can be like the crazies are in town, and I'm going to avoid that, or I'm going to protect myself from that, and then align with other like-minded people, because together you have the strength. I've been telling in the last couple of years, whoever would listen to me, not too many, it wouldn't be great if Democrats would go to some of the red states and let's move there, and then then there would be more Democrats, and then it would turn into a blue state. It was kind of a simple plan, but it might work. Yeah. I also hope that we can get rid of the Electoral College, because that seems to be a bit of a mess. But again, that was brought to us at the beginning, when Pluto was there in the first round. So it comes round again, and it's like, oh, can we have the political courage, instead of having a prohibition law, we can have let's get rid of the Electoral College. The filibuster should go. Things like that. that one can then ask for certain reforms as you choose for yourself what is right, what you feel is correct, and what would be good for the nation. And then, write your congressman and get involved yourself, become Congress people yourself, and then make those changes. And so basically the bottom line on all of this is being proactive. Recognize that certain ideas, notions, alternative facts are being spread around, and the personal solution is to, again, reevaluate some things for yourself, what is right, what is wrong, what do you want to have for yourself or not, and then pass that on to your friends and associates and families as best as you can, recognizing that sometimes you're not always going to agree, but sometimes I've seen this compromise thing show up, and this is, remember, back to when Pluto in the 30s, what did they do? They just kept quiet, didn't confront things, but they went to the speakeasy, to the underground place, and they're going to have the drink, right? So they were basically breaking the law, which was kind of a, that to the system, but they could have also put some energy into changing the system. Ultimately, it did change. This was an experiment that lasted 13 years, as you may or may not know. But it needed to change. It was, I think, maybe well-intentioned, because there was, alcoholism and excesses of where does the family money go. That's what they were really worried about. So, earnest concerns. And one can even say then right now that even, with the conservatives, they probably also have some earnest concerns. But maybe the solution is not so great. Yeah. So, striving to understand others, and that is where this Jupiter in Pisces, a water sign, is really going to help us here this year, 2022. At the same time that the United States is having a Pluto return, which basically is, ruled by the rich in its many different forms. That's not really necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what their intentions are and what are they going to do with it, and are they going to be good and just and fair and giving everybody else a fair shake. For instance, one thing that has happened here recently is the minimum wage has gone up. You see that across the board. However, we just saw real estate go up, and other prices, commodities, evidently. Housing, supplies, and so forth, that has really gone up. And so any types of gains that, those who are worried about the $15 an hour, and anything that they got, they just lost with, the raise in all these other costs. And so it's like, so what? So that's part of the trickiness, to say, try and see beyond what is, we're being told. For instance, I come from a holistic health background, and I imagine many of you do also here too. And, paying attention to what the government is telling us about the pandemic and the solutions to the pandemic, I have pretty much mostly heard, maybe 90%, about getting a vaccine. Now a booster shot. I have not heard anything about eat correctly, alkaline, acidic body dynamics, go out, get into nature, get exercise, a holistic approach towards health and healthy living. I mean, I didn't hear any big lectures about that coming from the government or from the TV. How about you? Yeah, I'm just like, get that, get that vaccine. Meanwhile, what was happening in New Zealand. They had it fixed and finished before the vaccine came. But was the rest of the world just saying, what are they doing over there? Let's copy them. I didn't hear that. We're back to Pluto, the big business pharmacies, saying we're going to make a bundle on this one. And they did. Not to say that, that, vaccines are wrong or money grubbing, because Benefin knows we were all of the same age, that, we had the polio, we had the measles, we had, diphtheria, I've got some scars on my arms, and I'm not, unhappy about that, it's better living through chemistry, I say. But if it's just a narrow-minded, the vaccine is the only way that we're going to get through this, no, it's more complex, it's wider, it's more personal, and then it has to do with lifestyles and choices, and let's be more healthy, and it's so nice. We've got the window open over here. Of course, it's nice being in Florida in January, I must admit. So you all, many times, probably for health reasons, you came here too, to live a healthier lifestyle. But you see, that's also part of just making good judgment calls about what you think is right for you, where you want to live, how you want to eat, exercise, bicycling, yoga, movement, holistic perspective, and that is a personal health choice. But then we have to move that over here towards the political side of things right now, because it's asking, the United States is a sick patient, okay? And it is asking for citizens to step up, and to get involved, and to, whether that be calling your congresspeople or just, getting involved. Because the other side is doing it. They are involved, aren't they? They are, sometimes quite loud, I just visited St. Augustine on the way over here just 2 days ago, and this woman with a huge flag, Trump won, and yelling the fact that Trump won. It's like, oh my goodness. Well, they're also exercising their right to protest and to, say what they think. And oftentimes the liberals, and I get really, kind of frustrated with the Democrats in Congress. Well, I think they're kind of wusses sometimes when they could be really stronger, and it's sometimes just a wringing of the hands. Oh, I wish the Republicans wouldn't be so mean, But in the meantime, it's like, you've got the Congress at this point, barely, and you've got the presidency, and it's like, can you do some real reform here? And I don't see enough action, to tell you the truth, because it's being a little bit, again, too passive. And that's my point. We can be polite, we can be observant, we can say, I wish things were a little bit different, but then sometimes you just have to say something and make your actions. And it makes it easier when you do it in a group dynamic. And that's the whole idea behind even the origins of the United States. It was the United Colonies, which became the United States. They grouped together to fight a common enemy. Same thing goes with if that common enemy happens to be a conspiracy, or it happens to be that's a strange notion, the Great Steal, for instance, and you can just be passive and say, oh boy, but that's silly. Of course that didn't happen. And it's so unpleasant to confront it and just say, oh no, it was fair. And even a bunch of Republican Congress people and legislators and judges made their conclusions about that no, it was a fair election. And even those people, on the 6th of January a year ago, they thought, that they were patriots and revolutionaries, even though once they were in jail, they had a different story. But so one can be strong and forthright and just say, yeah, we got to change things, and make things right. But someone's going to be doing it, and it's so far the ones that are more proactive about it seems to be more the conservatives, and the liberals are kind of getting ready to defend, but cautiously, but not actively. Yeah, and it's again really sad because who of course wants to have another civil war? I mean, I would not look forward to that. But if push comes to shove, and what would have happened? Here we have like the what if thing. What if they had succeeded on the 6th of January, and Pence would have said, Trump did win. What would we have collectively done? I mean, that's a personal choice, but there's many times we have been kind of complacent. And I take this back actually to the O.J. trial. You remember O.J. Simpson. And that might seem kind of strange that I would be bringing that up, but that was a situation where all of the United States was just riveted to the TV and watching, like the circus, the legal circus at that point. And at the conclusion of it, they just did not agree, but then didn't say anything, didn't do anything. Luckily, they had the civil suit, and then he lost that. But it was like something like that, which America is invited to watch the television, to watch the legalities. That, by the way, it doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong. You just watch the legalities. And then soon after that, then we had the 2000 election when George W. Bush lost, and the Supreme Court, I think something happened in Florida too. And then the Supreme Court stepped in and said, we're not going to, recount some votes. And then that was the end of it. And here was yet another situation where probably millions of Americans were just watching that, sometimes aghast, but with that underlying statement, well, you didn't like it, but so what? This is how it's concluded. So we have to really be careful about the passivity, And when you think about 1776 and the revolutionaries, they were not passive. Okay, and sometimes it might get so bad, and I'm thinking, what will it take? I mean, we had, as I said, the Rittenhouse thing. I mean, there was no protests about that. And who was it that in Rodney King? Remember when that happened in the 90s? Boy, it was like immediate. But it was the black subculture that reacted to that. And they're already angry and pissed off. Okay, but some of these other things that we should be really outraged about and say, we demand the dismissal of that particular judge. And Rittenhouse was obviously guilty. But again, here's another legal thing that says, here's the legal system up here, and we're just little citizens, we don't have the power, what do we know anyway? And we've been trained like that. Remember, I'm a hypnotist, okay? And one can be suggestion, and we have a very nice, obedient, polite citizenry, as it were. But then there's smaller groups here and there, and I find it so ironic, that we were fighting the redcoats back in the day, and now it's the Reds. And I remember not that long ago, all of us grew up with this, what were the Republicans yelling about in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Better dead than red. Right, and now that the Reds, it's like, I'm just watching this over a period of time and say, what an interesting morphing, transformation of a particular party that, and as we know with Trump, he was very close with Russia. It's like, wow, is this the Republican Party that I've been watching for my whole young life? Evidently, yes. So, but that's part of the Pluto shift and change. Bubbling up from the underground, so kind of magical, kind of maddening, but you take it from a hypnotherapist. that there have been many times we have been impressed upon to think in specific manner, oftentimes just to go along with the system. Don't make waves, be polite, be civil, in an uncivil situation.
So I'm trying to, again, go back to trying to find some hope in all this. How about the younger generation? Are they gonna be more proactive, do you think? Or more passive because of social media?
They're going to be more proactive, yeah. And I feel more optimistic about them because already they're tuning out, a lot of things. And one might think that, they're apolitical, but they're making their own choices about things and going outside of what is typically done. Of course, that's not true with all of them. We can even take a look at the 1960s, and then the hippies and the revolutionaries of that time. They were also a minority. It's only a minority of people who were really, protesting. So, we do need to have some people get involved, and I think the young people are doing it. They're called the millennials.
I have two.
I think they will probably align, and maybe they might start a third party, because I don't think they agree with the two that's being offered. And I personally think that would be welcome. As some of you know, I lived in Europe for 10 years, and it's not unusual to have 5, 6 parties over there, and then you can vote for a particular party that's closer to what you really believe. But then those smaller parties, they have to work together. They have to join forces. They have to compromise and come up with common and good and practical solutions. Whereas here, it's either left or right. It's either it's either you want Hardee's or do you want McDonald's. Yeah.
Yes. So guys, as we're sitting, here in the breath of this, and you're talking about Pluto and the different things. So when we hear that term, sometimes it's written in the stars, and you think, has this really all happened? Because this is the natural course of things. I mean, times change, people don't. I mean, so how much of this is just kind of a predestiny, and we have free will, we were born with it. Some people are going to take one side, the other in the middle. How much is just out there anyway? And then it's up us to up with our own free choice and free will to just act accordingly, maybe based on our signs. I mean,
yeah, that's a very good question there, Jerry. And as a hypnotist, I have come across many times someone who had, let's say, a tyrant father, and they were kind of bullied by that father. And then, age 18, they're gone. They left that home. 20 years later, they have got a boss who's very similar, who's also a bully, And so it's it's implanted, it's in the psyche that, there can be a strong, overbearing person in your life. Was it fated? There's a sign. It's a sign. So is it fated that you're going to be meeting this tyrant boss 20 years later? No, it is a pattern. And the pattern is this time as you confront this person, you're going to be doing it as a young adult, different than when you were as a child, when you have to be, you don't really have the power as a child, but as an adult you say, I don't like this, I don't approve of this, I will not submit, I will not deal with this person. So I'm out of here, or I'm going to, if they're doing something illegal, you can turn them in. But so I think that things come to us that can have a variation of a past thing, but it's actually more as an opportunity and a lesson to do it differently. Sometimes people continue to be the victim, and then it's here, same thing, and then it's more like fate. But if it's more like, I recognize this, I've been here before, and I'm not going to do it again. That's what I'm, bottom line, what I'm really talking about. It's take stock, see what's going on, make your own personal decisions, What do you value? What is part of your own, core belief system? And then move forward with that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Mhm.
I just have to add, I went to a lecture earlier this morning from Chris Christie, and he was talking about people being so troubled today, and them saying, I've never experienced anything like this in my lifetime. And he said, which is so fits into what you're saying, he said, well, you say back to them, there was the Revolutionary War, there was the Civil War, there were the 1968, pass the mashed potatoes.
Yeah, right. We have been here
And it is,
before.
yeah.
Yeah. But part of that mental virus is that going back to the good old days.
Yeah.
And then say, when was exactly when was that? And so now that is not like something from the past; it's something from their fantasy. Because there are always those good old days for a select group of people. And my general feeling, again, as a hypnotherapist, is that people who can look back fondly upon their upbringing in my community, in my hometown, it was very nice and we were friendly to each other, and that was really good. I think that's what they're talking about, to the good old days. But that was not happening in the next town, and that may not have been happening in the next part of the town that they lived in, that there was, incest going on and beatings and so forth. So, but when they nostalgically, and collectively think about, oh yeah, back to when it was really good. Well, your particular family probably had it pretty good, but the nation did not. So be careful of projection, as they say.
I'm curious about your perspective on how much social media, especially for younger generations, are impacting their decision making, because I appreciate what you said, like a lot of this is sort of preordained, but I feel like so many people make decisions nowadays based on whatever information source they're reading. There's inherent skepticism about the news. Like I work in media, I talk to my friends all the time about what do you use as your primary source of information, and like whoever you're talking to, you can get a very different answer. And so I feel like, my niece who's 19 years old, she doesn't watch CBS News. She just she looks at YouTube videos and TikTok, and she'll get little bits of information here and there, but a lot of it is just what she's talking to her friends about. So to me, I feel, my parents who watch CBS News religiously, like I'll read articles on, on Apple News, and like I'll read certain, like I used to read the New York Times, but I feel like, depending on what they're covering, they might have, so I always try and read various sources just so I can get that right balance. I don't necessarily know if the younger generation feels that way about it, but I just feel like some of, what's going to happen, going into this year, 2024, it'll be interesting to see like what's going to continue to influence people.
So true, yeah. And we found also in the 2016 election that social media played a rather large role there. And I remember reading this article about this place, I think it was in Macedonia, in ex-Yugoslavia, where a bunch of teenagers wanted to make money with social media, and so they sent out a bunch of false right-wing, they just made up stories, pictures and so forth, and they got a lot of clicks, and they made money. But they didn't care who won. They were not living in this country, but that was just an example of what can be done with this. So I take more of a psychological perspective on this, and then an astrological on that, Minnie. And so on a psychological perspective, we have those people who love the sound bites, and it's so easy to do that. I compare having a workout in your mind like having a workout in your body. And I then compare that also to karma. And karma means action. And there could be good karma and bad karma. But action means movement and exercise. So anybody who's into yoga or into aerobics or into, exercise in a regular way, you are working out, you are doing your physical karma, and you put in energy into that, you put in energy into the body, and guess what? You have more vitality, you're more flexible, you're stronger, you have more stamina. So it's you give, you receive. Same thing with reading a book. I mean, I've seen slowly fewer and fewer people evidently don't read. I mean, it's a minority who actually read books these days. But I think that's also mental exercise. And so like also a karma thing. And as you use your mental muscles and you read, you get strong, but if you have a diet of sound bites, it's just not very strong up there. You're not getting well fed in that sense. Now on the astrological side, I find this very intriguing. There was this very rare thing, and some of you interested in astronomy might have recognized this as I tell you, but in 2004 and 2012, the famous 2012, there was a Venus-Sun alignment. And it was in the news and astronomy. And so here's the sun, and then little Venus went across the face of the sun, and people could see it from the earth. It was very, many people were excited about that. But on the astrological level, Venus represents females, as well as aesthetics, beauty, music, art. And the sun is about expression and individuality and get it out there. And so Venus going across the sun, it's like, boom, we had a bunch of really interesting music and movies and entertainment, not only in the year 2004 and 2012, but I give that also an orb. So 2003, 4, 5, 11, 12, 13, during that time, it's like, wow, new things coming and excitement and so forth. And of course, when did Facebook and when did these social media things happen? During that very same time. And I mentioned now Venus and females because just in the last 2 years, they have recognized that young teenage girls especially are more suicidal, more depressed, and they are paying attention to what they get, the feedback from their little devices. And then they're they post a picture of themselves and they have a nice dress or whatever, for Christmas or their birthday. And then suddenly comes back all of the critiques of that. And it's really devastating for them. And I mentioned that, because those young girls were born during that time that I'm talking about. Another interesting thing about that time, and I just noticed this about 3 years ago, watching, you've seen The Voice, where they have the competitions of people singing. Well, just 3 years ago, they had like some 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and I said, they are really good. They're great singers. And why, suddenly these really young kids, I go back and they were born during these times that I talked about, when Venus and the sun.
Which times?
Pardon?
Which times?
2003, 2004, during the basically, the first part of this particular century. Yeah. And by the way, that 2012, that was such a big thing connected to the Mayan stuff. They calculated that wrong because they were looking at December, but actually the alignment happened in June. So they were looking at the wrong time. And it wasn't like the end of the world, as we all know. But again, here's a virus, a mental virus, connected to the metaphysical world, where they had a false notion and made a bad judgment call. What they could have said is that this would be a personal renaissance in art, music, aesthetics, and so forth. And so you artists and musicians out there, go out and produce. And that's how That's how an idealistic astrological congress would have been working at that point. So that, any other questions or ideas, perspectives?
I just have one question, it's a little off topic though.
Mhm.
You talked about the guy who had the abusive father,
Mm-hmm.
and then fast forward 20 years and he has an abusive boss.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow he's learned how to deal. But what I wonder about is in your hypnotherapy, are you able to help somebody who hasn't learned how to heal? And if so, do you have to keep having little doses of hypnotherapy to change the reaction? Is that a clear question?
It is. You know, and one could take a look at hypnosis like in a, let's say like a stop smoking type of way, where sometimes you can have like one session and someone stops forever, you know, and sometimes you have to have repeated sort of things. And it just depends on how deep you go, how profound you go. I've got a couple of books over here on some of these different hypnotic sessions I've taken, and there's a type of session that I have called a transpersonal journey. And it actually started when I was trying to do a past life regression. I put the person into a trance, they go into an altered state, and the ideal is to have a person to get in touch with their soul, because it's the soul that knows where you have been, you know, in past life as well as in between lives. Sometimes when we have everything set up and that person is there and they are in a trance and they do get in contact with their higher self, they don't go to a past life. And I go, but that's why we're here. And the higher self, and I learned this, you know, slowly but surely. The higher self, the soul, wanted to do something else. And typically, it wanted a healing. And a deep level soul type of healing would be to connect with the dynamic of, let's say, those parents. Okay, and we'll then tune in specifically to that abusive father. Oftentimes, I will ask, what kinds of associations or connections do you still feel with that person? And sometimes it feels like cords coming from you to dad. Sometimes it's like a chain going to that particular parent. Sometimes there's multiple cords going to that particular parent. Well, we got to do some cutting, right? And so whether that be dissolving, whether that be, you know, asking an angel to come forth and bring your sword, I'll use 101 different techniques to do whatever we need to do. But it's basically finding the issue, finding a particular time, and that could have been age 5, age 10, whenever. Let's get that situation there and find the culprit, as it were, and let's just deal with it and cut, remove, release, heal, protect, and then things are profoundly shifted at that point. But you can see that's a more involved procedure than a simple, you know,
I'm gonna stop smoking.
relieve and understand and let go. Yeah. So let's get deep. That's what Scorpios like to do. Okay? All right, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.